Okay, we start again. Autonomous driving isn't just a tech challenge. It's about creating AI in the real world with all its consequences and uncertainty. At Zenseact, that mission is clear: towards zero faster, zero fatalities, and zero collisions. But how does it actually work to build AI, to trust it at that level? Today, I'm joined by Ödgärd Andersson, a lady that I'm inspired by, my former boss, the CEO of Zenseact. And welcome to yet another episode of the Vanessa Eriksson podcast. I'm Vanessa, your host, and I'm here to bring you meaningful conversations with leaders and influencers on data, AI, innovation, and leadership. Welcome, let's get started. Welcome, Ödgärd. It's so wonderful to have you here, truly.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, the joy is mine. How about we begin with you introducing yourself briefly?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Ödgärd Andersson and I'm the CEO of a company called Zenseact. We are part of the Volvo Cars group and we develop software for increasing safety in cars in the areas of driver support and autonomous driving.
You know, I think it's so impressive what you do because you are leading one of Europe's most advanced AI organizations. Amazing. When you look back at your journey, what has changed most in how, you see your role as a leader?
Well, I think everybody talks about the change of speed, and I think we've always felt that things are changing very fast, but I think this step that's happening with AI is really accelerating things so quickly. So I think as a leader, we need to be super curious. We need to understand the potential of everything that's coming at us, understand that whatever was true 6 months ago is no longer true. Things are improving at a pace that we haven't seen before, and we need to absolutely try to stay on the wave and surfing with the benefits you can get in this massive change that AI is bringing. And as we're an organization that's actually developing AI, we of course need to use the best there is in our development of our products, but also for like the organization at large in how we work and our tools and everything. And as a leader, I think that requires constant curiosity and constant change management, I think.
And I think that brings us very close to then the core of Zenseact, towards zero faster. A mission that I have loved the years that I was there. That's the thing that kept me getting up in the morning. But, eliminating traffic fatalities. In your role as CEO then, what makes that mission real for you beyond the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think having the opportunity to go to work with something that has a real purpose, I think makes me personally feel really good about getting up in the morning. And I know that is true for many people who work for Zenseact. So the reason the company was created is that much more of the functionality in a car is defined by the software nowadays. Yeah. And that software has actually more and more been transformed into AI and machine learning based functionality. And as that happens, Volvo Cars come from the angle where they really want to be the leader in safety. And if you really want to lead in safety, you want to make sure that the software and the machine learning that goes in is optimized. Yes. for making things safer. So that's kind of at the core of what we do. And as a leader, I mean, we actually really use this mission we have in our everyday life. So trying to prioritize our roadmaps. We think about, will this actually make the accident numbers go down? Will we have fewer fatalities? Will we be able to steer away from more critical situations? And we really do that all the way from the big decisions for the whole company all the way down to team level, where we're trying to maximize the safety benefit of what we do. And I think that is the core of how we lead the company. And of course, it's also a part of attracting talent, and many more than I and you are actually attracted to not just going to work to maximize the sales of a product we don't really need or whatever you might do with AI, but actually it's something that can make a real difference.
But how does that influence does it influence the way you make your decisions then as a leader?
Yes, I think it does. Because we could, of course, do things in a different manner, go with whatever, optimized for only cost or optimized for speed of rollout. I mean, obviously, we want to have a high speed of rollout because we bring safety faster, but we always bring our zero mission into our decision making.
If we move from the why to the how, Zenseact, I love this line, Zenseact is arguably one of the best AI environments in Europe. But internally, how much AI is actually augmenting engineers' productivity versus being focused purely on the product?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely for us started very much with the product because, there's a difference between the type of machine learning and AI that we develop for the product. That's been around for quite some time and is now like being accelerated by the new tech coming all the time. But I think with the advent of generative AI, the tools you can actually use for your work is, of course, radically different now than it was 3 years ago or 5 years ago. So we're adopting AI into the way we work at a very high speed. And I think our organization is naturally quite curious about this. So we have quite a few engineers who are at the forefront of adoption. But as in every large organization, it's not true for everybody. And we're continuously looking at, these are processes that still are quite manual. We should be putting more into automating them. And I think if you look at society in a broader perspective, there are so many low-hanging fruits where you can actually get massive benefits from eliminating boring and manual work with AI. So, and we still have a lot to do also in our company, even though I think we.
But nevertheless, I think where companies, you have been working, the entire environment at the Zenseact is kind of, AI. I'm thinking you are still ahead of the curve versus other companies who are just, looking at their processes. What can they do? Where can they implement it? Wouldn't you agree?
I think we are, but on the other hand, we also know quite a lot. So I'm also always feeling like we should be doing more and a little bit paranoid about new things that we haven't yet implemented as much as I would like to. And I think that's a good feeling to have right now. You should feel like it's a race and that I have to run all the time.
Yeah. Generative AI is expected to improve software engineering productivity by roughly 7 to 18% in many organizations. Where have you seen the biggest gains? Is it the coding, the testing, the simulations, decision making?
First of all, I think that's a quite conservative number. I think it's probably much larger. We haven't even seen the full extent of this at all yet. But I think it's across the line. It's everything from generating code. It's from finding patterns when you're looking for when you're fault tracing. Obviously, there's a lot of documentation that we have to deal with as safety critical functionality in a huge car that could actually potentially be dangerous if we don't do things right. We need to be very sure about tracing the requirements, documenting everything, making sure we have verified everything to the extent we need before we launch. So, and in all of those areas, there's potential for quite large efficiencies with AI.
And then I'm thinking, but none of this works really without data. And data is the kind of the core of collecting that data. And I think also in large-scale AI environments, there's often a tendency to keep collecting the data, which is not always easy because there's a cost connected to it. How do you balance that, the volume and the cost with the actual value?
That's, I think, very difficult. I mean, when you move into very heavily AI-dependent products, much of the actual engineering skills you need is in the data pipeline, in curating the data, in automating things like annotation. I mean, a few years ago, we used to spend massive amounts of money on manually annotating things. Now, most of that is automatic. We have a little bit of, checking that reality matches the automation. So massive gains there, but it's really about building a fully automatic chain of data where you collect things automatically, where you curate automatically, and where you throw away things automatically. And that that's a journey, starting with understanding what the value is and then continuously refining that. And I think that's actually an engineering field that didn't really exist to the extent it does now. And I think
that's amazing. Because I recall also that, it's this keeping the data. I don't know when I would need it. I might need it later. Just keep it for now. So has that, because it's also the needs from the engineers, has that changed?
I mean, in the end, it's quite difficult to know exactly what you will need. So we need to experiment about what helps actually in improving our models when we do the training. I think to some degree we're fortunate that we have the ability to collect such massive amounts of data that keeping everything is really not an option. We have the possibility to collect data from all the customer cars nowadays. And if we do that with multiple sensors, including cameras and radars and ultrasonics,
yes,
exactly. So we cannot hoard all the data we find. And it's actually such large amounts that we absolutely need to automate as well. And that helps a bit because then people don't really need to sit on the decision on each collection of data. It's rather a bigger picture of automating and finding the value.
That's fantastic. That's come a long way, Ödgärd.
Still a lot to do.
But lovely to hear that, because I think at least when I was there, that was one of the challenges. How do you then? I mean, we didn't have any automated processes at that time, so fantastic to hear.
But I mean, it's not like it sounds like everything is perfect. I think this is a field that we're going to keep working on and learning and automating more and more. So we're absolutely not finished yet.
Let's talk about synthetic data, because that is becoming a core part of AI development. In autonomous driving, how far can it realistically substitute real-world data?
Well, I would say we don't know that yet. But what we have found is that we cannot replace real data completely. With synthetic data. And I think it's a little bit difficult to know exactly where the limit is, as when you train a model, we don't, as humans, we cannot actually tell what might be the issue with the data if the model is not performing according to the behavior we would like and according to reality. What we have found empirically is that if we use a rather large amount of synthetic data combined with real data, we get very good results. And the difference between that and fully real data is not so big. Okay. If we go for only synthetic data, then the quality goes down. So right now we're balancing towards having a very large amount of synthetic data in the future. And I think this is a journey we're on, so we're not there yet.
Sorry, I have to ask, is there any example that you have where, it was only synthetic data, it didn't work, and then...
I think this is a research field where there's been quite a lot of research. And so far, fully synthetic data doesn't seem to work for the type of use case we're developing. But that said, all of the generation of synthetic data is improving all the time as well. So who knows, in 5 years, maybe we will have... I think we will always probably have a small amount of real data that we always want to keep for consistently checking that reality is behaving in the same way as whatever we simulate. But there is massive cost savings on using synthetic data that also takes out the need to annotate what is it actually we see in the data, because if we create it synthetically, we auto-annotate it.
Yeah, but does that also then bring down the cost where you are driving around collecting data, because then you're getting synthetic data? Is that also replacing?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And it's not just replacing the volume of collecting data, but most of the worst sceneries that we need to collect, we don't want to run into. So let's say a child steps out in front of the car. We don't ever want to be in a situation where a child steps in front of a car, but we can create that scenario synthetically, and we can make sure the car hits the brakes when that happens. But we'd rather never experience it. And that's true for millions of things. We can also create much more complex combinations of scenarios. So we may collect data in a scenario where there's somebody on a bicycle doing something that's dangerous. We could also combine that with more cars in front of us that are obstructing the view, or other road users that cross the path, or other more complex scenarios that aren't actually what we saw in reality, and thereby we can make sure that the software is even more performant in complex scenarios.
Nice. You work with a lot of fun things.
Yes.
But that becomes even more critical, right? When you think about the hardest part of autonomous driving, the big challenge, identifying and handling these rare edge cases. How much can synthetic data support that?
Yeah, as I said, then I think that's a very big opportunity with synthetic
finding
data.
the edge cases, or working with them?
Yes, so we can both make the scenarios we can actually collect more complex to make sure that the model can handle even more difficult scenarios. But we can also make sure that things we know can happen from the past, and we have databases together with Volvo Cars that go all the way back to the 70s with different crash scenarios. And of course, all of them don't have sensor data that we can use, but we can actually learn from those scenarios and create them synthetically. So I think there's a lot of potential in the future for using this to improve our performance.
Wonderful. I'm thinking, because ultimately that doesn't have to work, but we also want to scale it.
Yes.
All that safely.
Yes.
And I think it's
I was going to say something about you said about the edge cases. I think that's one of the things that makes our job very interesting, but also quite difficult to explain to people, because most people have kind of experienced some form of, I went to San Francisco for vacation and I took a ride in a robo-taxi. Yeah. And it's difficult to understand, why don't we have this in all the cars in the world? Yeah. And the way we develop things, I mean, it's quite easy to make autonomous driving functions in a nominal use case where everything is nice, everything from the weather to no people out in the traffic doing strange things. Yeah. But the real challenge is really in the last, percentage of strange scenarios that most of us never run into. Yeah. And we need to make sure that we work in all of those, and not just in one place, so we can run a taxi service in one city, but in every single road we put the car on. Yeah. They have to, the car has to be able to manage. Yeah.
So that's always, being on top of it, right? Staying on your toes.
Yes. And it actually involves massive amounts of data, because we not just have to make sure we can handle all those scenarios, we also have to prove that we can do it.
Yeah, yeah. Because in most companies, speed is everything. You want everything done yesterday. But for you guys, it's safety. Safety in everything you do.
Yeah.
So how do you navigate that tension without slowly, do you see that you kill innovation in that process?
Absolutely not, I think, because we want to be able to roll things out with speed, because every time we improve something, there's a potential of saving a life in traffic somewhere, and we don't want to sit on that, right? But on the other hand, I think to some degree we're a bit lucky, because we don't ever feel the pressure to release dangerous things just because they're cool, because the reason we exist is to bring safety. we have a lot of wishes from the mothership in Volvo cars. They really want a lot of functionality, and we want to roll out functionality that is really improving the delight for people, because then they use it a lot. And if they use it a lot, the safety potential comes out. But we don't ever want to do that at the expense of being safe.
Absolutely. Which leads me to a very practical question. How do you validate something as complex as AI behavior in the real world when you can't test every scenario?
Well, I mean, this is actually not new with AI, because software in cars in general needs a high degree of simulation and automation in testing, because you simply cannot put the car in a test car and run around the world and hope to run into all the kinds of things the car needs to manage. Yeah. So for a very long time, actually long before the big AI revolution, we have been investing in simulation and automation of testing. But of course, it's even more important now, because when you do machine learning on a rather large model, you don't fully understand what happens inside the model. So you need to really be able to simulate the behavior it has in real life before we put it out there, and make sure that it can actually manage all the types of accident scenarios that we have collected and that we put into making sure it sees what's going on, it acts the way it should, and of course that also that it doesn't act on a lot of things it shouldn't be, because that's always a balance with physical AI products. You could see kind of ghost things in the world and do ghost moves, and that's not very good in traffic either. So it needs to act when it should and not act when it shouldn't.
True. But what are the hardest trade-offs around safety that show up in practice?
I mean, this is one of the trade-offs,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to have a product that sees ghost things on a highway and hits the brakes when you're running in 120 kph. So basically making sure that it doesn't overreact to things that aren't real. That's one of the hard things, but also, of course, all the time understanding how much sensor input can help us to really understand the world way ahead of when we need to act, because we typically don't want to be reactive, we want to be proactive. So if we spot something in a long distance, we don't want to wait until we're really close and then hit the panic brakes. We want to rather, change lanes, get out of the way, make sure there's some room for whatever's happening in the front, and that way not ever getting into a critical situation. So ideally, if our product works at its best, you wouldn't really notice that it's there. It just basically helps you when you need the help.
I imagine there's a lot of trade-offs also show up in leadership. What surprised you most when you stepped into the role as CEO?
I don't know. I think, I've led rather large organizations, tech-heavy, deep tech organizations for a long time, and I think in many ways they are similar, even if you move from one industry to another. Many of the issues you have to deal with are similar. Of course, as a CEO, you have the whole full range of things to deal with. And I think what's interesting in our world, and that's been quite a journey in my role, is that things move from certain things being at the top of the agenda one year, you have completely different things another year. So I mean, we had a quite clear view on how to deal with machine learning in cars 5 years ago. Then came the whole evolution of large language models and transformers that completely changed the tech. Then came the geopolitics we're in the middle of now. All of a sudden you cannot collect data in one country and transfer that to another, which basically in our case means that if an accident happens in one country, we cannot automatically make sure it doesn't happen in all other countries. So a lot of regulation that impacts us. We need to be super innovative about how we train models in such a way that we, at least to the largest degree possible, can make sure that we learn from every single market we're on. also things, regulations on what equipment you can buy from one place and put in another. I mean, this global world that we thought was the only one we would ever have is now a very regional world. And I think that has very much impacted my role and how you have to kind of deal with those risks, trying to be proactive about the company having a way to operate, even then when the world changes.
What is the most difficult decision you've made as a CEO? I want to say, have there been difficult moments? And of course, I'm sure there have been. But what, if you recall any, what was the most challenging or the difficult leadership decision?
I don't know. I think decisions are. Someone once said, this is not my word. I don't know exactly where to attribute the quote, but that you take decisions when you need to take them. And then you try to do it with the best information you have at that point. And I mean, I have a lot of brilliant people around me. We try to make sure we get as much information as we can for the decisions we need to take. And if we need to take a decision, we do. And in that way, I don't think it's that difficult. I mean, is it perfect? No. Do we have to evaluate, did we do the right thing all the time? Yes. Do we change sometimes? Yes. But I think if you try to have like a view of where we're going, and we work quite a lot on everybody understanding where we're heading, then people can try to make decisions based on that, making sure they move in that direction. And then most of the leadership challenge is about making sure the communication works, so we understand, are we really all aligned on where we're going? Are we actually heading that way? How is it going? Do we need to interact to make it faster in some area? Is the communication broken somewhere? But the decision making, you do as best you can with the information you can get.
That sounds very like you. Cool chick. But in this, in the complex field, I guess not everyone agrees all the time. So how do you lead teams then when even experts, fundamentally disagree? And I can imagine, I mean, we all have different opinions.
Yes, which is good, right?
Absolutely.
Because we're in a field that we're solving a problem that hasn't actually been solved.
Yeah.
How to automate driving in a safe manner. There's been a lot of automation and that scales. There's been automation that's not safe. There's been safe automation that doesn't scale too well, and we're trying to solve this problem. None of us have the answer of exactly how this is going to happen. So I think it's good that people disagree. So when people disagree, I try to, get the experts, as you said, together and just describe what's the problem. Do we agree on the problem? And most of the time we agree on the problem. And then try to agree on what potential options do we see. And that is also quite doable most of the time. Then we may not agree on which option is the best. Then we can always take a decision, weigh the pros and cons. Everybody doesn't have to agree on that. No. But if you can agree on the problem description and the potential ways we can pick from, I mean, I don't have a problem taking a decision that not everybody is happy with, because sometimes you cannot make everybody happy.
No,
but I think everybody needs to be heard, especially when we're doing complex things and we don't have the answer.
If we zoom out of Zenseact for a bit and go into a broader industry, what's one assumption in AI mobility that you think is completely wrong?
Oh, wow. I don't know that, actually I don't think there's a broad consensus on what the assumption on AI mobility is. I mean, if you look 10 years back, there was a lot of hype about nobody will own a car in 5 years, and basically we will have some kind of super advanced car sharing schemes that we all use. I think there are some fundamental problems that need to be solved. Robotaxis are working fantastically where they are deployed in like very large scale, dense urban areas. There's potential to make that scale much more, I think. That will probably not be a very viable business in every single transport we have, with like people living in the countryside and in less dense areas and so on. We see that people like to have their own car rather than only sharing, and I think we will see different people acting in different ways. So I think maybe if there's one simplification in the assumptions is that we will have one system that quite soon will take everything over. I think this will be a transition of how we act that will happen over a long time, and we will see multiple different automation routes in parallel during that time. And then how long it takes, I don't know.
We both know how intense the autonomous driving space can be. What keeps you motivated on those difficult days?
Well, that very much goes back to our core mission. Yeah. I mean, we're aiming for a super high level of automation because we believe that takes out the human factor out of driving. Mm-hmm. Now, if that's a long route before we have that everywhere, every single time we improve something in the automation, it also goes into every single mile that people drive when they have driver support. So since we're doing this to make things safer, whatever we do always makes things safer. Whether it fully automates in some places and partially automates in others, it's still creating safety in both those scenarios. And that's what motivates me.
Yeah, fantastic.
Every day the car is safer.
Yes, and the roads are safer.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Ödgärd.
Thank you.
And thank you all of you for joining in and listening. I hope, I did say she was inspiring, didn't I? I hope you got just as much as I did out of this. If you haven't subscribed, please do that. Oh, what are you waiting for? Bye for now.